playing in day one, and feel free to root along. Also, if you're into YouTube, you want to watch maybe some playbacks of what happens here today. YouTube.com/Pokemon is where you can find that, and of course, more pictures and more excitement to be found over at Facebook.com/Pokemon and Instagram.com/Pokemon. Just really, pick your social media form of choice. Chances are there's Pokemon content there.
Yeah, there's plenty to watch back as well, I think. And we're in that good position this year where we've had a really good Ultra Series.
Oh, yes.
And it's been a shorter series, so all of those games are going to be very relevant. I think there's some discussion to be had a little bit about the adaptations between now and the North American International Championships. That is definitely in the past, though, and here we are at the World Championships. Our player names have been revealed to you right there. Gavin Michaels versus Kazuki Kobayashi. We go back to that North America versus, the rest of the world kind of mentality that we've been going on with. We'll see exactly how this one plays out. I did hear some murmurings a little bit earlier on. I was walking around the floor talking to some friends, and some people gave me a little insight into Gavin's team, which we're going to see right now.
Oh, interesting.
The Groudon, Incineroar, Tapu Fini, Lunala, Snorlax, and Jumpluff. The Jumpluff was what a number of people were talking to me about. Kazuki's team on the other side, a Groudon of his own, paired up with the Yveltal, the Tapu Koko, Metagross, Incineroar, and Mimikyu there as well. I know back in 2016, there was a team that was very, very popular with Groudon, Yveltal, and Jumpluff. But now, while both have taken the Groudon, we've kind of gone one of each on this one.
If you want to talk old formats, I'm pretty sure 2006 had a very good team with Groudon, Snorlax, and Jumpluff on it, but that's that's a little bit too far back, I think, to be relevant anymore, unfortunately. But Jumpluff certainly is an interesting Pokemon because, I think what it's known for best is its access to Chlorophyll, which doubles its speed in the sunlight, along with moves like Encore, Sleep Powder, are really the things that you'll find on it. Just meant to be very fast and sort of act as a disruption for your opponent. And looking at Kazuki's side of the field, yes, he does have that Tapu Koko that has the electric terrain, but Yveltal, does not make contact with the ground and certainly will be a target for those sleep-type moves.
Yep.
Especially if Gavin decides to bring that Lunala with him. Yveltal and Incineroar and even Mimikyu to a certain extent are the Pokemon that he will not want to be facing down.
It's so weird, to be honest, to see the Mimikyu and the Snorlax split up over different sides of Team Preview. I'm so used to seeing them as that potent partnership they've been in previous years, and to see them split up, you've got to wonder, is there now just a superior option? Of course, we did see, we've seen it in the past, Mimikyu interacting with some of the Lunala interactions coming from its signature moves. Definitely makes it a little bit harder to get that safely into play, and we'll see if that becomes a key point in this contest. Both players taking some notes, getting ready to push on into the rest of this World Championships. We see both of them just taking a little look down, ready to assess and see what's going on. As I know the leads are on the field, we're just going to make sure they're all set for those. It'll certainly be interesting to see who decides to take on this one as soon as possible.
Well, it's a very rough matchup. I mean, Gavin on his side of the field has a Lunala and a Jumpluff against the Yveltal and Tapu Koko on Kazuki's side of the field. And, talk about Pokemon that these Pokemon don't want to see. Jumpluff doesn't want to see that Tapu Koko, Yveltal, or Lunala doesn't want to see that Yveltal. So Kazuki, I think, making a very safe lead relative to the other Pokemon on his team. Yveltal does get access to Tailwind, can certainly use the opportunity to set it up for some of his slower Pokemon in the back. Tapu Koko, just one of the most powerful Pokemon, I think, in the format right now. So even though it just matches up perfectly against Gavin's Pokemon, I don't think he has to do anything too extreme here to take advantage of that. I like the pivot from Gavin here to get the sunlight on the field to help that Jumpluff, but if Yveltal uses this turn to set up something like a Tailwind, that speed might not be enough for it to start, using Sleep Powder or other sort of disruption moves to its advantage.
Yveltal's definitely got such a wide move pool, though, that it could be good for him to just see what it's got, see what it's been bringing in that limited move slot. Tapu Koko starts off the turn in electric terrain with the Volt Switch, landing comfortably on that Jumpluff there. Good amount of damage, not enough to concern it with a knockout or anything, but it gives Kazuki that opportunity to pivot on his own, make a switch after seeing that kind of manual, slower switch from the beginning of the turn on Gavin's side of the field. Of course, this Yveltal still just sticking around, not going to be leaving immediately, and here we go, the Groudon mirror is going to be in full force. Of course, we are in the Ultra Series. There's the Primal Reversion, and that's honestly going to be the most control of the weather ever. They both have Groudon No concerns of the Rayquaza, nothing like the Kyogre to come in either, and we'll see exactly, who tries to take advantage. Sleep Powder misses the Yveltal, doesn't land there. It is an inaccurate move. And the Yveltal over on Kazuki's side of the field just snarling back. The special attack dropped on both Jumpluff and Groudon. Being awake after that missed Sleep Powder is absolutely huge, and that snarling retaliation could be important. We've been talking a little bit about how the Groudon may be specially trained. If Gavin's not done that, he's not too concerned. And obviously, I don't think the Jumpluff is there to be dealing any attacks anyway. It's there for the Sleep Powder. It's there for that kind of mechanic. But it's good damage.
It's good damage, and we know how this Jumpluff sort of matches up in terms of its speed prior to the sunlight coming out on the field, and I think that's going to be important in future games. Maybe not necessarily now. This Jumpluff is going to be faster than anything on the field. Yveltal did not go for something like a Tailwind that past turn. It is unfortunate that Sleep Powder missed, but unlike Spore, Sleep Powder does carry that opportunity to miss, and I think that's why Jumpluff is sort of lesser seen in comparison to Amoonguss. It's not accurate if you want to put something to sleep. I think it's a little bit more better off if it goes for something like the Encore or one of the other disruptive moves that it brings along with it.
Well, this turn it's been given the opportunity to Sleep Powder again. This Yveltal will be put to sleep at the second time of asking. The Groudon on Gavin's side did protect, and that means the follow-up Earth Power from Kazuki's Groudon is not going to be dealing any damage. Of course, the Groudon is grounded. That's a bit of a tongue twister, but it does mean that Sleep Powder is not going to concern it. So he's in a good position right now to kind of ignore that Jumpluff a little bit. There could be some concerns with some of the other strange moves that it brings, but at the end of the day, it should be in a pretty okay position overall. Of course, it does try and deal with the Groudon very comfortably on Gavin's side of the field. It's not going to be there for this turn, though, as it switches out into the Snorlax.
Yeah, an interesting adaptation from Gavin. Snorlax is known to be a slower Pokemon, and to see it come out on the field now makes me wonder what he has planned for his endgame. Yeah,
well, the Encore does go towards that Groudon, meaning it's going to be forced into Earth Powering for the foreseeable future. Groudon's Earth Power will be heading towards the Snorlax, so it was going towards Groudon initially, but that's just not as much damage as he could have been doing there. And that's really a good adaptation by Gavin to say, well, you know what, I'm going to lock you into Earth Power. I'll switch into something that takes the Earth Power very, very well, and you're going to be stuck dealing suboptimal damage for at least a couple of turns.
Or you're going to be forced to switch, and I think it's up to Kazuki to decide if he'd rather just stick around with the Earth Power for a couple turns or switch. I like that he stayed on the field. I think something important to keep in mind here is how long Electric Terrain remains active, and as a result, how long this Jumpluff is on the field and whether or not it will be able to Sleep Powder things once it's gone.
Well, the Yveltal does wake up. It does fire a foul play towards that Jumpluff, and the Protect there going to keep it safe. The Earth Powers keep coming, obviously, from Kazuki's Groudon, and that's going to land into this Snorlax. It consumes its berry, and it starts stockpiling. A move that we've not seen used as much for at least a couple of years now, but both those defensive boosts make sure that that Groudon's going to have an even tougher time wearing it down with those very much traditional kind of Earth Powers. It's going to need a big hit, and if the stockpile can be worked in amongst some recycles as well, this Snorlax could become a huge problem.
And it's a big contrast to how the Snorlax was played earlier on stream, where we saw the presence of Trick Room and Belly Drum. I think it's very interesting that Snorlax is the Pokemon to sort of stand out, I think, in the day one field, but given the fact that it can be a very powerful attacker under Trick Room, we see it here, it's probably going to stay on the field for the rest of this game, knowing that it got one stockpile up, maybe even 2 or 3. And it's just one of those Pokemon that you have to figure out how to power through, and no one's really bringing the Pokemon that can guarantee knockouts on it.
Well, Kazuki's just not happy with his board position right now after that stockpile last turn, and he switches out into Tapu Koko and Incineroar as a combination. Of course, that Tapu Koko already in the electric terrain, so not going to be able to reset or extend that immediately, as Jumpluff Sleep Powder will not be connecting there. Snorlax, though, revealing the recycle, basically inviting Kazuki to hit it once more. It won't be easy to one-shot that thing. That's going to be sitting around on the field for so long. And this is something that we talked about a little bit earlier. I know a number of the other casters have talked about it too. Snorlax has been talked about. It's been one of those under-the-radar Pokemon that everyone knew about, and Gavin is showing exactly how to execute it. Bring it in safely, let it take some hits, bury, stockpile, recycle, and then weave in another stockpile.
Yep. And it's certainly not a stranger for Gavin. You know, I think he used Snorlax very well in past formats when it's been allowed. And, you know, to see it being used here alongside a Pokemon like Jumpluff and just have such a commanding board position, I think it's just an indication of how comfortable he is with this kind of strategy. And unfortunately for Kazuki, you know, he switched in that Tapu Koko just a turn too early, which is why he's really forced to use Fake Out on that Jumpluff and switch out the Tapu Koko, and then I think immediately bring it back in.
I think he has to, otherwise the Sleep Powder is just going to become too much of a problem. I mean, even without the Chlorophyll active, he's going to be in a really weird position to try and deal with that. It is one of those kind of odd ones right now where Jumpluff is next to Snorlax. You don't want to switch out the Snorlax, so that kind of gives Kazuki a little bit of control in that regard. So he can say, well, I'm not going to give you Groudon, I'm not going to show you Groudon, and then your Jumpluff is never going to be able to Chlorophyll.
Yes, but on the other hand, you have to wonder if Jumpluff even needs access to Chlorophyll, at least for this turn, because it is going to be faster than that Yveltal and that Incineroar.
Oh yeah,
and we know that he's probably not going to try for a Sleep Powder unless he's feeling like he might catch Kazuki by surprise.
Yeah, well, there's the Tapu Koko coming in once again. Electric Terrain coming back into play through the Electric Surge ability, and that means nothing will be going to sleep. That does limit the options of this Jumpluff quite significantly. But I don't really think there's a way to deal with this Snorlax. Definitely not anymore when the Encore comes through onto the Incineroar. That means it's stuck into Fake Out. And after a couple of stockpiles, no boost to the attack. But Snorlax's return is going to start dealing that damage. This is going to be an absolute nightmare for Kazuki to get through. He's just been leaving it alone. It's taken damage, it's healed up damage, it's ready to heal up more damage. And I think Gavin's just putting himself in the driver's seat with this. Kazuki's responding so much to this Jumpluff and letting the Snorlax do what it wants.
And that's the problem with a Pokemon like Jumpluff, especially now that we know that it has Encore. You really have to respond to it because otherwise your opponent can sort of lock you into suboptimal moves. They can lock you into things that they can take advantage of. And it's just really a very intimidating Pokemon on the field, despite the fact that there is no Intimidate ability. You know, it forced Kazuki to switch out there. You know, it's going to force this Groudon to potentially take some damage and the switch, and just overall will really continue to sort of dictate the board position as long as it remains on the field.
Well, Jumpluff protecting, so keeping itself on the field for a little bit longer. Tapu Koko's Volt Switch will land into that protect as Snorlax just goes on the offense right now. Another return, bringing Tapu Koko down well under half of its health. And this is the perfect Snorlax play. It's just been sat there. It's got a couple stockpiles in. It's got its berry ready to go, and I can't stress enough how big an issue this is going to be. Of course, some Snorlax used to use Belly Drum. I think after seeing the foul play earlier, that's just completely off the board.
And that's
for
okay.
Kazuki. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah, it's the Snorlax doesn't need the offense when it has so much defense. If you can outlast the Pokemon on the opposing side of the field, you might have to worry about the timer or maybe the round time a little bit more than you would have to otherwise, but that Pokemon's still going to be sitting pretty, and you can't stop this Snorlax.
There's really no way. It's now got a much more offensive partner in Groudon. That is going to be an interesting switch in. But the Volt Switch there, doing an absolute pittance. That is negligible damage. I think I've seen more damage from Tackle in the early game. On the flip side, though, you know, that Groudon could be a great switch in if you want to start going after some of the Pokemon over on Kazuki's side of the field. Yveltal comes in place of the Volt Switched Tapu Koko, and it's still not in a great position. But we are going to see the Eruption, though, from Kazuki's side. We'll see how much it does to Snorlax. Not very much.
Just enough to activate the berry, though, which it is important to keep in mind. This means that Snorlax will be forced to use Recycle in the next couple of turns. But just seeing how much damage it did and knowing that this return is potentially going to, you know, deal a little bit of chip damage to this Yveltal, it's just more board management, I think, for Gavin. But again, Groudon, it's great that it's out on the field. It'd be great if Gavin could somehow weave in an attack here, or otherwise sort of use the fact that Groudon is present to give Snorlax more of an opportunity to attack. But this is really Snorlax's game to win. Yeah, I mean, Groudon protecting there, maybe trying to draw a little bit of attention. It does draw the eye of the foul play from Yveltal, and the follow-up Eruption will be doing, again, decent amount of damage to the Snorlax, but it should be able to pretty comfortably take it right there. Doesn't even fall below half, and there it is. Plenty of time after the 2 stockpiles to weave in another Recycle. Right now, Gavin, you know, isn't getting the big damage he might want from some of those returns, but as long as he can keep it safe and on the field, he's going to be in a great position to just try and win this game with Snorlax alone. Maybe another stockpile if he's feeling cheeky, or maybe a Belly Drum once the Yveltal's gone. And what I'm curious to see as well is how this Snorlax's presence is going to affect the game moving forwards. I mean, yes, this is only game 1, but the Snorlax is happy to sit on the field and take its time, and as a result, I'm curious to see if it's going to affect how Kazuki approaches game 2. I mean, regardless of if he wins or loses this game, you can't let your opponent just sort of sit around like this for this long, because it's taking up so much time.
Well, the Eruption was a single target attack this time. Obviously did a little bit more because of that change in the damage dealt. But the Eruption is going to keep losing power, especially after a critical hit returns. A critical hit return lands over on that Groudon, so he's going to be able to take those moves a little bit better right now. The interesting thing for me, though, will be we haven't seen that Lunala from the first turn, and while Yveltal's still a concern, if you can find a little opportunity to get that in, or at least play it safely, he could be in a great position. Lunala does take the field, it is at full health, always very relevant with the Shadow Shield ability around, and this Snorlax is still at very, very healthy levels of being able to sit around.
It is, but you have to wonder why the Lunala came out here as opposed to something like the Jumpluff. I mean, there's no electric terrain, even though the Tapu Koko is in the back of Kazuki's party, potentially to be sent forward in a couple turns. Lunala might not be able to deal damage to that Yveltal, and Snorlax certainly is too slow to really do anything threatening to it as well.
We saw the return doing such a small amount of damage earlier. This Intimidate is going to help a little bit. Make sure, of course, that the Snorlax is limited in just being defensive rather than pure damage as well. Yveltal's Snarl won't be doing anything to the protecting Lunala, but it will take a tiny, tiny amount off that Snorlax. Snorlax is a very healthy health bar. The recycle coming through. Gavin being very well aware he always needs to have that berry up before he drops below half health for any reason.
I like the Snarl from that Yveltal as well. I think that was more of a play by Kazuki to try and break the Shadow Shield on that Lunala more than anything else. Also to weaken any powerful Z moves that it might be carrying. But what this Lunala wants to do moving forward is going to certainly be interesting, as Wide Guard is definitely an indication of a more defensive, maybe supportive even set.
Yeah, and that Wide Guard is going to protect both these Pokemon from the Snarl. Incineroar, though, following up, not falling for that, will knock off into the Snorlax, so the berry is removed as Snorlax does decide it's time to start returning this Yveltal. It's not going to even bring it down below half either, and this kind of changes things up a little bit, I think, for Gavin. He isn't able to rely on it just as much.
No, because once a berry has been knocked off by an opposing Pokemon, even with a move like Recycle, your Pokemon unfortunately cannot find that berry again. So really great timing by Kazuki. I like how he waited until that Snorlax was holding the berry yet again. And just look at how much that Snarl did to that Lunala, even with Shadow Shield still active.
And here's the problem as well. The Incineroar should be feeling pretty good. I think now is the time where you've got to try and at least do something about this. Lunala finally revealing the Z Crystal. Not a big shock right there. It's been pretty prevalent in the recent months as one of those big attacks when you need it. But right now it's staring down two Pokemon that probably feel pretty good about their ability to handle it.
Definitely. I think this menacing Moonrave Maelstrom is more of an attempt by Gavin to try and, one, figure out how much damage this will do going into game 2, and 2, maybe see if there's a way out. It's definitely going to be a tall ask now that Snorlax does not have access to its recovery. That Jumpluff also at very low health. Kazuki, hasn't dropped a single Pokemon all game, and unless this return from this Snorlax gets a critical hit or something, he's most likely going to be able to hold on to that 4-0 moving forwards.
Well, Incineroar is going to save itself for a little bit more Intimidate action later, making sure Snorlax is really, really weak. And there's so many options removed once you get rid of the berry there. You turning out on the Snorlax, getting a little bit more damage down. It's all going to start adding up now, and most importantly, sticking for Kazuki. He's not going to have to worry about the berry coming in there. That Incineroar knockoff has been absolutely essential in this game. Snorlax's return, going to continue dealing damage. We saw it didn't do that much last time, and it's still so low.
Oh.
It's finally Kazuki's time to activate one of these berries of his own. Yveltal takes that hit, and even though it doesn't activate it quite as early, it is an Ayapapa berry, the same exact berry that the Snorlax is holding. And Kazuki gets to show Gavin what it feels like to see your opponent recovering that much health.
And Yveltal gets to have a tasty snack, so I think everybody wins. Except maybe the Snorlax, unfortunately, which it looks like Lunala is trying to protect itself, maybe so that Snorlax can get that one last hit against that Yveltal, but I don't know. It needs to be a critical hit at least, and even then it might not be enough to knock it out.
Yeah, well, we did see the foul play fail there. The Earth Power goes into the Snorlax. It's a decent little amount, and this Yveltal still taking returns like a champ. Not concerned at all about this. This game really swung as soon as that berry was knocked off. That Snorlax became a lot more manageable, and for the first time in a long time, it's going to be leaving the field as well. Jumpluff takes its place, as you mentioned earlier. Jumpluff exceptionally low in its health. Lunala just keeps protecting. Doesn't feel too good about, what this Yveltal can potentially do. And there's the foul play to land. We'll see what Groudon goes for. Is an Earth Power, so Jumpluff able to come in and maybe make a little bit of wiggle room for Gavin. Something like a Sleep Powder landing would be great here. It means this Yveltal couldn't just go after this Lunala. And that may be, I think, Gavin's big way out, of course.
I think that's what he's looking for as well. I like that he finally removed the Snorlax from the field. Yes, he did have the 2 stockpiles up, but those Intimidates were just adding up one after another and really, unfortunately, having a downside on that Snorlax sort of damage potential. And even though Lunala was... never mind. That Sleep Powder miss was rough there.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, is Yveltal reveals Sucker Punch. Does show that even if you're trying to shut it down with Sleep Powder, it does get the opportunity to move before it.
Yeah.
The Sleep Powder, unfortunately, misses for Gavin as well. That's only 1 in 3 that he's connected so far in this game. The Groudon able to start tidying up there with an easy eruption onto a very frail Jumpluff, as Snorlax, with a very minimal amount of health, is just in a really unwinnable position, I would say.
Great information for Gavin, though, knowing that the Sucker Punch is present on the Yveltal, I think is going to change how he plays Game 2. You really can't rely on Snorlax at such low health anymore, knowing that the Yveltal could use that opportunity to pick up damage if maybe there was a Trick Room option on the team. I think it's really interesting how he played that Snorlax, and I kind of want to focus on it as we talk about adjustments going into Game 2, just because it really felt central to Gavin's strategy. He wanted to get those stockpiles up, he wanted to use the recycles and to get the berry back and just use return to slowly whittle down Kazuki's health, but I think Kazuki just brought the right amount of offense that even though it felt like those turns were a bit slower, involved a little bit more switching and positioning, he was able to save that Tapu Koko for later, so he didn't have to worry about as much Sleep Powder. He was able to position the Yveltal opposite the Lunala exactly when and where it needed to be, and even that Groudon just had such an intimidating presence with those eruptions. Yeah, they weren't doing, the maximum potential damage on that Snorlax, but it felt like everything just slowly added up over time, and that Snorlax on its own could not do enough to sort of keep up with that.
I think the big thing for the Snorlax is don't get knocked off. That's the key to this
definitely.
game, right? It literally was the end of the game there. The Snorlax was doing so much work. It was sat on the field. It was unbeatable. But, the big concern for it is, what are you going to do when you don't have your berry? The key part of this strategy is the recycle, is being able to stick around on the field for as long as possible. And as soon as that knockoff came through, even though it took a couple turns, which, maybe Gavin can find an opening in there in the follow-up game, it really was kind of the end of the game at that point.
Yeah, and I want to see this Snorlax maybe not stick around once it gets a couple Intimidates out on the field. Kazuki revealed to us in Game 1 that he's comfortable, switching his Pokemon around, switching that Incineroar in and out as needed. And as a result, I really like the adjustment that we're seeing from Gavin in his lead. It's going to be that Jumpluff and that Groudon, and certainly 2 Pokemon that are going to be deal a lot more damage as we start off this game too.
It's not even just a question of a lot more damage, it's just immediately having access to just a really easy chlorophyll, right? And making sure that you do land a big something, like a Sleep Powder on this Yveltal.
Assuming your accuracy's okay. I mean, unfortunately for Gavin, he only hit 1 of 3 last game, and that's definitely a risk he's going to be taking here if he decides to go for that. He might also use something like the Encore, maybe protect this turn if he's worried about that accuracy slowing him down, but just having the Groudon opposite the Tapu Koko, honestly, I think just sets a lot more of an aggressive pace for him at the start of this game, and I like that. He's not necessarily relying on the Snorlax to get all of those boosts to sort of start his momentum off, which I think is what he needs in this matchup.
Yeah, I think he's going to find a lot more momentum a lot earlier on. He does start off with a successful Sleep Powder onto this Yveltal. That's not going to be able to cause any problems in the follow-up turns. But immediately, we're just going to have a Z move coming out of Tapu Koko. We did see the dance. We all know at this point exactly what type that Z move is going to be as well. The fairy dance, very, very distinctive with we know the type, but not the exact move.
I was going to say, but as the Titan emerges from the ground, you know, that's going to be the Guardian of Alola, which indicates that this Tapu Koko knows nature's madness of all moves. So this will do a guaranteed 75% damage to that Groudon, which is a very nice chip to have, especially going into turn 2 of this game when you're Yveltal, no Sucker Punch.
Yeah, I think that's actually more than chip at that point, right? That's a full-on damage-dealing attack. Of course, you're never going to get a knockout with it, but you're making this Groudon so manageable. Or whatever comes in place of this Tapu Koko. If it's something grounded, it's not going to have to worry at all about the sleep powders, and that could be so essential. As you mentioned, Yveltal, if it wakes up, could start to Sucker Punch and then deal with it that way. But the opposing Groudon would probably feel pretty good about its chances of getting rid of that. It's not going to be able to get put to sleep, and as long as he doesn't lock himself into a silly move like an Earth Power that he can't get out of, he's going to be in a great position.
Yeah, and I really liked how Kazuki revealed the Z move that turn 1. You know, I think he was kind of counting on that Tapu Koko getting knocked out by the Groudon on Gavin's side of the field, and knowing that just was like, okay, even though there's not much I can do here, I could reposition, but I'm going to be taking something like a Precipice Blades. I'm going to deal a nice chunk of damage to your Groudon, and then just take advantage of the switch-in afterwards.
Well, when it comes to saving that Pokemon, an immediate Tapu Fini switch-in for Gavin did bring something this time to allow the terrain to be changed on his side. Jumpluff's going to keep itself safe this turn. Could see maybe an impending eruption that it doesn't want to deal with. And Yveltal immediately wakes up. It does immediately foul play, and it was going after the Groudon. Does end up hitting a Tapu Fini instead for his troubles. Groudon goes for Eruption, doesn't want to get locked into something rather unpleasant there. That's going to be doing good damage. Obviously not too much to Tapu Fini. Takes...
You say not too much, but it was at full health and boosted in the sun, and that Tapu Fini looks like it's sitting just above half of its health, which means we could see it get knocked out this turn.
It's more than insignificant, is how I'd categorize it. It's tough to always kind of say. This Yveltal forced to leave the field, though, immediately. A very quick decision for this turn for both players, actually. Obviously, it depends on both of them to get done. Incineroar comes in the face of a Tapu Fini, not always where you want it to be, but maybe thinking it's very essential. Maybe thinking that the Tapu Fini's taken the place of the Snorlax as well, so not so worried about saving that knockoff. Icy Winds are going to start to come out from this Tapu Fini after the Jumpluff failed to land a Sleep Powder on what was an Yveltal, now the Incineroar. The Icy Winds, of course, going to lower those speeds, may be important towards the end game, especially as we do have Groudon on both sides of the field. And another Eruption will be weakened, of course, by that little bit of Icy Wind to chip damage, but Groudon doing enough to bring Tapu Fini exceptionally low, and of course bring Jumpluff down to that ever-present Focus Sash. Bringing Tapu Fini low may come back to bite him a little bit, though, as Tapu Fini does get to activate its berry, in this case, just the Citrus Berry.
Okay. So that would have activated, a bit sooner, but good to know. That's great information for Kazuki. One thing I really wish to know about just this current setup, I mean, we saw the switch out from that Yveltal into the Incineroar on Kazuki's side of the field, but Gavin was the one who actually brought the Misty Terrain in himself at that point. It's just really interesting that, he does have this option for Sleep Powder and the presence of Misty Terrain on the same team. And it might be an indication of just how this Jumpluff is being meant to play. Maybe he doesn't want to rely on Sleep Powders in some of these situations, and just maybe the presence of Encore is enough to sort of apply that pressure to his opponents.
Well, Jumpluff did protect itself, maybe trying to catch something with Encore in the following turn. We do see the Eruption start the turn off for this Groudon, so we saw Kazuki get caught by it in the previous game, and Incineroar is actually just going to U-turn, so saving itself for a little bit later. Lunala bought well under half on the switch-in. That's not what you want from it in the slightest. And we'll see exactly what Kazuki decides to substitute in. Of course, the Tapu Koko is gone already early on, so the Yveltal forced to come back in. And that's just so awkward for him because it is above the ground. It's not protected by Misty Terrain, and that does leave a little opening for this Jumpluff to try and land one more Sleep Powder maybe.
It does, and another interesting thing to note with the reveal of the Lunala is Snorlax was not brought to this game, so Tapu Fini was indeed the adjustment that Gavin made after Game 1 going into this Game 2. What Lunala can do at this point in time, I feel like it's almost going to be forced to use its C move, and unfortunately for Gavin, if this is the Incineroar coming in on Kazuki's side of the field, again, we're not going to see it deal as much damage as it could because both these Pokemon resist the ghost typing.
Well, obviously Gavin took the bait in game 1. We'll see if he takes it in game 2 here. Yveltal protecting itself, doesn't want the Sucker Punch to deal, or the Sleep Powder to deal with, wants to save a Sucker Punch for later. As Lunala starts to wide guard, looking out for maybe those snarls that game 1 revealed to us from Kazuki. Jumpluff does try and Sleep Powder. That Protect becoming very, very important for this Yveltal. And now we're in a super interesting position where Incineroars come in. Jumpluff didn't protect last turn, so may be able to protect its way through another fake-out turn here. But as soon as you protect yourself, Yveltal is able to go after this Lunala and level up the Pokemon count. So I think a lot of decisions here rely on Gavin and which pieces of his team he really does prioritize.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough call. Even though this Jumpluff is doing an amazing job of providing board pressure, you know, it's not really putting a lot of damage out on the field, and because of the misty terrain, Yveltal is really the only Pokemon that it can target down with those sleep powders, and as far as we know, that's really its primary utility in this matchup. I like that Gavin is saving the Lunala for later. You know, I think that it'll definitely be key once that Groudon is back out in the field for Kazuki, but until he gets to that point, he needs to find a way to knock out one of these two Dark-type Pokemon, or at least put it within KO range of something that Lunala can do.
Well, Jumpluff refuses to get knocked out by the Fake Out, protecting itself on 1 health once more. The foul play from Yveltal into the Tapu Fini slot. Not where you want that to go in the slightest, but a little bit of damage is going to add up. You know, the berry's already been consumed, you may as well try. And this makes the kind of decision-making a little bit easier, I'd argue. Of course, there has been the removal right there of the Misty Terrain, and Tapu Fini, the only Pokemon with a terrain still standing, means he's going to be in complete control of that. Sleep Powder landing on that Yveltal. There's no concern about you not being able to do that anymore. We'll see exactly what this Incineroar can follow up with. It may not be given the chance or given enough time to do it, as Tapu Fini's Heal Pulse will land on this Jumpluff, bringing it above half. It's not usually the kind of Pokemon you see that on, and this means that this U-turn isn't going to be able to get a knockout. So Gavin may have just found himself a really good opening by bringing his Tapu Fini in early, making sure that the terrain stays gone, weirdly enough, and then able to push on from there. Even this Groudon's going to be able to get put to sleep, and he may just be able to win the game off putting his opponents to sleep and slowly wearing them down with attacks from, you know, that Lunala in the back, you know, something like that Groudon when he switches it in. That could be his key to victory here.
Yeah, Kazuki definitely has an option here if he wants to go for it. It's a bit aggressive in terms of avoiding sleep, but if he, you know, uses Protect on that Groudon, switches in the Incineroar, and Gavin doesn't call it and go for the Sleep Powder in the Yveltal slot, you know, there is going to be the potential to, you know, use Fake Out and otherwise deal some damage the follow-up turn, but that's going to all come down to predictions.
Well, we see Groudon leaving the field, doesn't want to get caught with a Sleep Powder. Maybe Incineroar a little more tolerant of that as well. We'll see exactly how that one shapes out very, very briefly. It's going to be a Sleep Powder towards Yveltal. It's already asleep, so not cutting the mustard in this instance, as Tapu Fini's Nature's Madness will land on that Incineroar. Makes it so much more manageable for those easy knockouts later in the game, especially when something like Incineroar comes in. Gives you a few more options. Gavin Pokemon may be low on health, both in that yellow section of their health bar, but, you know, he's still in a great position when he's got the way to put his opponent's Pokemon to sleep. You really can't do too much. And on the same side of it, if you're on Gavin's side, if you're on Kazuki's side rather, you can't just take your foot off the gas, because then he's just going to keep heal pulsing.
Yeah, it's a really precarious position to be in. I like the fact that Kazuki does have access to Fake Out this turn, and maybe can use that to his advantage a little bit when it comes to positioning. But as you said, Gavin is in control of the terrain, and Gavin's in control of whether or not he wants these sleep powders, you know, to continue to be a viable option. And I like how these two are sticking on the field, because that's giving him so many openings.
Incineroar put to sleep right at the top of this turn. The Icy Wind following up little bits of damage, but most importantly lowering speeds, making sure any potential Groudon mirrors later in the game are won in Gavin's favor. Incineroar fast asleep, no surprise there. That's its first turn on the sleep counter, and Groudon just came in and isn't going to be given the opportunity to do anything in this turn, you know, what are we expecting? Jumpluff to put Groudon to sleep and Tapu Fini to start attacking?
Yeah, or to try to at least. This Groudon could protect, and Kazuki could maybe hope for Incineroar to immediately wake up. You know, it did already have that one turn of mandatory sleep that last turn, you know, but that's only going to be a chance. And if Kazuki goes for that and, you know, Gavin calls it and he uses this opportunity to go for something like a Heal Pulse into one of his own Pokemon, you know, that could be critical.
Well, Gavin realizes right now that he's got the key Pokemon asleep over on Kazuki's side of the field, and he needs an attacking offensive threat as well. The Eviltal will come in. It's still asleep. It's still not able to do anything. So both the Pokemon on Kazuki's side are taking a nap, and this easy switch in means a Heal Pulse lands on that Groudon, and he's going to be in a fantastic position to keep things healthy and keep his Groudon doing damage. That does mean the Incineroar wakes up, though, given that opportunity, and the Flare Blitz was heading towards what was a Jumpluff. Now a Groudon takes it with aplomb. Does drop just below half, but Heal Pulse is still on the field, and I don't see a real easy way for Kazuki to get through this.
And it was still a net win, you know, with the Heal Pulse. He recovered more damage than he took from that Flare Blitz. So overall, you know, this Groudon I think is going to be on the field at least for a couple turns now. Unless something like this foul play connects and KOs.
Yeah, this gets really exciting. The Eviltal wakes up immediately. Doesn't get the knockout with foul play. Groudon hanging on with 2 health. Eviltal being brought down to half of its health with a very prompt Nature's Madness. Groudon's Fire Punch heading towards that Eviltal, of course, boosted by the sun, is going to be enough for a knockout, but maybe Eviltal's done all the work it needs to do, depending on where Incineroar goes with this attack. Does head towards Tapu Fini, so the Tapu Fini's around for the next turn, but we get that really interesting kind of hyper-switching turn where a Pokemon gets knocked out. We do know that he gets to bring in a Pokemon, and he's taken Incineroar off the field. Of course, Kazuki's down to just 2 Pokemon. The Groudon on his side of the field has now been freed from the change of Icy Wind earlier on, and this Groudon over on Kazuki's side, over on Gavin's side, only clinging on, easy to pick up with a potential Fake Out, and may kind of force Gavin's hand a little bit into a potential Protect. Gavin does still have all 4 of his Pokemon though, and that's something that you just can't ignore, especially with the fact that Sun is going to be it's going to be up. There's no way around it.
Yep.
This Incineroar does have to be super careful as well. If you Fake Out the Groudon and knock it out, that's great, but then Gavin just brings in Jumpluff and completely shuts you down in that regard. He may not even let the Groudon go down for it. He wants to save it for later as Jumpluff just comes in to see how much it can do.
Yeah, and I like this switch here from Gavin because I think he was trying to give himself more of an opportunity to use something like Icy Wind to lower the speed on the opposing side of the field. But it looks like Kazuki called that, you know, correctly predicting that the Groudon would either protect or switch out, and went for the Fake Out on the Tapu Fini instead.
Did Kazuki just Fake Out and Protect in the same turn?
He did, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to double check that was what I saw. So he really let his foot off the gas there. He really didn't get anything out of that Fake Out and Protect. And now Jumpluff is just able to encore. So Jumpluff came in completely unopposed. Groudon is now forced into protecting. Incineroar's not going to get caught by this Icy Wind, but Groudon certainly is. And Kazuki just, you know, letting Gavin dictate the pace of this game for the rest of the game. You know, Groudon does land another Protect. Congratulations. But it's really not what he needs to do at all. Incineroar will knock off on this Jumpluff. So Incineroar was spared that encore. But right now, you know, it's just going to be a case of Gavin deal with the Incineroar and then deal with the Groudon, I guess. You know, right now, this following turn, Incineroar's not going to be able to win this one. You know, as long as Kazuki doesn't get some crazy super mega Protect, you know, where he doesn't get caught by Icy Winds forever and he's still able to outspeed Gavin's team, it's going to be a really kind of uphill struggle.
It is down to the wire, though. I mean, yes, this Groudon did fail to Protect, and Gavin will have the opportunity to heal his own Groudon up, but, you know, we've seen this Incineroar do a decent amount of damage to that Tapu Fini. If he's able to, you know, maybe remove the Tapu Fini from the field, which it doesn't look like that's going to happen, as Precipice Blades was able to connect with both Pokemon, bringing us into a Game 3. But just really, Gavin just sort of taking that game back. It almost seemed from the brinks of defeat. There were so many moments in that game where it felt like the momentum just wasn't in his favor. You know, that the Jumpluff was at too low of health, or that Groudon was just in danger, but Gavin just able to keep calm, you know, keep his eyes on the win condition and just pivot around excellently to keep that board control and give him a shot at bringing us into Game 3.
I'm going to be honest, I'm very confused by that late game play from Kazuki. You know, if you're faking out, you're trying to buy yourself that time, open up a little window to push on and deal some damage, and I think just letting Gavin completely into the game there. Such a strange play, but maybe something else going on, not expecting a switch perchance. Certainly interesting to see exactly how that one shook out. One of the key things I want to touch on, though, is how long these games have gone. Both of them coming in just under and around that 20-minute mark. That does mean, by most kind of standards, you know, we're not going to get this game complete. And both players, the onus is on them to really up that tempo. A lot of games we've seen here today have been slower. Of course, the first one was slowed down by that Snorlax getting set up. And this one was really slowed down a little bit, I think, by just both players taking their time, thinking through it.
There were a lot of switches that game.
Yeah, there was a whole lot of switches, but if you're in Kazuki's shoes, right, you've just lost game number 2, you had a really good setup going in game 1, you kind of just got to find what works and just commit to it early on, I think. And if you're in Gavin's shoes, you want to execute exactly what went on in game 2, which was having this strange control of the terrain by leaving your Tapu Fini in.
And knocking the Tapu Koko out almost immediately in turn 1. So I think that's definitely something that Gavin's going to have his eyes on going into this game. But, you know, I think Kazuki, he locked in his lead very quickly. I would be very surprised if he deviates from that Yveltal Tapu Koko combination that he seems to be really comfortable with in this matchup with Gavin. The big question on my mind is how Gavin starts this game off. Does he go immediately for that Groudon jump bluff lead that we saw in game 2 that applied a lot of pressure, or does he maybe try and slow things down a little bit just so that he can have those big hits waiting for him as we enter, you know, the late part of this game and potentially into those +3 turns that really decide a lot of these games that go to time?
I really think that Kazuki needs to be more aware and more considerate of the Encore as well.
Yeah.
Put some respect on it and really don't play into it so much, because we've seen Gavin's good enough, and clearly players at the World Championships are good enough to say, well, you can fake out, I'll just protect and Encore you next turn, and he seems to be taking that bait on the regular.
Yeah, or even just switch in the jump buff for free and then Encore the next turn.
Yeah, particularly once he got that heal pulse off, he was in a great position. Gavin going back in game number 3, though, and knowing what works for him, kind of forcing the hand of Kazuki Kobayashi a little bit here. Groudon and Tapu Koko, the adaptation from him, while Gavin sticks with that jump up in the lead again, similar to game 2, paired with the Groudon.
It's interesting that we're finally going to see how these Groudons sort of pair up speed-wise. You know, I think we saw a little bit of that in game 1, but in game 2, Gavin was very aggressively trying to get something like that Icy Wind down on the field so that he knew his Groudon would outspeed, potentially an indication of how it's trained. I'm really excited to see, you know, just how these two are going to play around this fact. And we know Kazuki, if he brought the same Pokemon he brought to previous games, you know, might have an Intimidate in the back to sort of weaken the physical power of Gavin's Groudon, which we saw revealed in that game 2. You know, there's also the threat of the Tapu Koko dealing some big damage to that jump off and the Groudon on Kazuki's side of the field as well. Even though, you know, this is a pretty great lead from Gavin and the jump off will have an opportunity to move first, there's really not much it can do. Both these Pokemon make contact with the ground, so you don't want to Sleep Powder. And it's almost like Gavin's trying to save this for a turn in the future where he can decide, do I want to switch or do I want to Encore?
I really enjoy the change up in lead from Kazuki, making sure, of course, that he's in a good position to not get Sleep Powdered immediately. Obviously, the Volt switch towards Jumpluff, the Earth Power towards Groudon in a really kind of smart way. Definitely good play there, and Gavin just scouting out, making sure that those moves are coming through. If he's forced to switch things around, then he's got a little more knowledge of maybe where he could put things. You know, if Tapu Fini is going to come in, probably put that in the Groudon slot. If Lunala is going to come in, bring that elsewhere.
Or
this does mean the
direct an Earth Power.
Yeah, the Jump Bluff's going to reveal Rage Powder. Make sure it does that, kind of forcing Kazuki's hand. See if he pressed Eruption or not. If he did, he's going to be in a great position. If he didn't, this turn gets real nasty with the potential Precipice Blades following up. This is a lot more aggressive, I think, by Gavin compared to previous games. Yveltal will take the field, will be potentially able to get Sleep Powdered if the Jumpluff is around next turn. And we know it's going to be around next turn as Earth Power is pulled that way.
I like how Kazuki did switch in that Yveltal on his side of the field. At least this Precipice Blades was not a double knockout. In fact, it wasn't even a single knockout. That Groudon is still hanging on in the red, and it's possible that Yveltal, you know, might be able to try and find an opening for it to attack. But Gavin just keeping that Rage Powder a secret until the very last game, you know, making Jumpluff a big threat. I think Kazuki, he can't really use Eruption anymore because Groudon took so much damage, but you have to worry if an Earth Power is going to be redirected again. Yeah,
well, it's something you have to be very considerate of. Jumpluff is going to Encore as well, just forcing those Earth Powers. So now he's got it locked into Earth Power. he can just keep Rage Powdering every single turn. And I think that means that, guess what, you know, you're going to be in a great position to just make the Groudon on Kazuki's side of the field absolutely useless. And as long as you can deal with this Yveltal in a timely fashion, you're going to be able to carve out a very early advantage. This game is going to run a whole lot shorter than our previous two. We're already down to just 7 minutes on the clock, a fraction over, but, you know, we're pretty much on the money for that, as Jumpluff is making this Groudon absolutely useless on Kazuki's side.
It's really interesting that Kazuki didn't even switch that Groudon out. It makes me wonder what that last Pokemon is and whether or not he maybe wants that Jumpluff just sort of, you know, within chip range or within more, you know, of a KO range from that Tapu Koko or something moving forwards. Unfortunately, he's had to give up his Groudon in order to do that.
Yep, well, we see that the Precipice Blades follows up on the Groudon. Maybe Kazuki just wanted something, you know, he could switch it in next turn and deal with it that way. Of course, he has to be careful now. There's a lot of turns of this electric terrain that have already passed, and the Tapu Koko coming in may be forced to switch out in the near future unless he deals with the Jumpluff quickly. This does mean, though, that the Rage Powder's become a little more dangerous. Something like the Volt Switch isn't going to be as big an option. But right now, you know, a Sleep Powder towards that Yveltal could be absolutely huge as kind of Jumpluff's last will, especially with the Groudon already down. Groudon doesn't care about this Tapu Koko, so if Jumpluff puts Yveltal to sleep, Tapu Koko can deal with Jumpluff, but then Groudon's completely free against Tapu Koko and sleeping Yveltal.
Yeah, Tapu Koko cannot knock out this Groudon. I mean, I think the most damage it could do here would be the 75% from the Guardians of Alola Z move.
Yep, Incineroar will come in though. Got to try and get an Intimidate down to deal with those Precipice Blades and Fire Punches that we've seen out of Gavin's very much traditional, well-known physical Groudon, capitalizing on that huge attack stat that it does have. Jumpluff protects itself, wants to see what's switching, wants to see what's going on before it commits to a move. As Groudon protects as well, Gavin's just let Kazuki play the game for a little bit and just watched exactly what's happened. Make those informed decisions if you have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and I like the switch-in of the Incineroar right now as well. You know, it would have stopped Sleep Powder for one turn. Obviously, the electric terrain is gone now, so it won't stop it anymore. But that Incineroar does have access to Fake Out and can buy Kazuki a little bit of time that way. You know, Fake Out plus a Volt Switch into that Jumpluff slot will probably knock it out. It's just you have to be careful about what you switch in. Most likely that Yveltal. And if Gavin's able to call that and maybe target it down with a Fire Punch on that Groudon, you know, I think he's going to enter sort of that late game phase where he starts just cleaning up and getting these KOs and bringing him really one win closer to making it to day 2.
Well, Jumpluff is caught with the Fake Out. That does mean that it's going to be knocked out by this follow-up Volt Switch. But the big concern right now is that Kazuki just didn't deal with Groudon.
No.
Of course, he does have the opportunity to switch out the Tapu Koko after the Volt Switch. So Yveltal coming back in will make these Precipice Blades a whole lot more manageable, especially after that Intimidate. But I really don't see many options for this Yveltal to deal with this Groudon. Precipice Blades will head towards Gavin's side, Kazuki's side of the field from Gavin, and the Precipice Blades misses Incineroar, so a whole lot of damage removed from play there. We do see the downside of these moves that aren't 100% accurate. In Game 1, it was Sleep Powder. In Game 3, Precipice Blades costing Gavin a huge turn right there.
Will give Gavin the opportunity to get that Tapu Fini out on the field relatively unharmed and unthreatened. So, you know, that's probably the best he's going to get at this point. This Tapu Fini certainly does, you know, provide that Icy Wind support that I think that Gavin was really looking for back in Game 2. But you have to think now, this Groudon has been intimidated. Yes, Gavin does have one more Pokemon in the back. Do I switch out this Groudon to try and get my attack back? Do I try and just get some damage down onto these Pokemon? It's really a tough call because even though he still, you know, has the Pokemon advantage, all these Pokemon are really relatively unharmed. You know, this could easily change in a moment.
What's up with Fini? Nature's Madness, taking Incineroar down to half health. It's a lot easier to knock out. And when your Precipice Blades actually connects, then guess what? You're going to be able to knock out Incineroar. That's 2 Pokemon down over on Kazuki Kobayashi's side of the field. And Gavin's got to be feeling pretty good right now about his board position. Incineroar and Groudon gone. You're just stuck playing against that Tapu Koko Yveltal. And, you know, you're definitely going to struggle to beat a Groudon with those two. We saw in game number 1, even with the big attack that Groudon naturally brings, the foul plays just weren't doing enough. And it doesn't look like Kazuki is going to have enough to power through something like this Groudon. The Nature's Madness turning into the Guardian of Alola may be a way to do it, but he's already revealed it. I think Gavin's going to be able to call that one and be a little smarter about it.
Yeah, if Kazuki did not go for the Z move this turn, I think there's a shot of something, connecting with that Groudon and putting it into potential knockout range. But, foul play is going to be weakened by the fact that this Groudon is intimidated as well, and it's just going to come down to how much damage can be done. And like you said, both these Pokemon really cannot harm Groudon otherwise.
Well, the Snarl and Electro Web combo, obviously no damage down on the Groudon after the Protect. The Icy Wind coming back from Gavin's side of the field after its special attack's been lowered doesn't land on the Yveltal there and does make sure this Tapu Koko's speed gets lowered a little bit. Really, Kazuki getting pretty animated about that one. Maybe something he was a little bit interested in for the rest of this game. But that's not a bad turn. I mean, you've done a good amount of damage to this Tapu Fini. And you've been able to buy that time.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, if that Icy Wind was going to miss a Pokemon, you probably wanted it to miss the Tapu Koko so that it was still guaranteed to be faster than this Groudon. Yeah, going into this turn, and you try and get that Z move up, and you just hope for the best.
Well, Lunala will be taking the field for Gavin there in place of this Groudon. Tapu Koko keeping itself safe for a turn, maybe doesn't want to get caught by a potential Precipice Blades there. And the foul play from Yveltal heading over towards that Lunala. Shadow Shield is a key ability, and it does keep it safe for another turn, as Tapu Fini's Icy Wind will obviously fall into the Protect of Tapu Koko, but this time connects with the Yveltal. That's absolutely essential, if you ask me. Kazuki is trying to open up as many doors to an endgame situation for himself as possible. The key thing to note, we talked about it earlier, we've forgotten about it for 5 minutes, but we're down to that last minute of time. So this could potentially be the last full turn of the game, and Kazuki is down in Pokemon. He needs to level that up and potentially just put himself in a winning position. Gavin saving that Groudon really, really wise because it's at full health and may be able to just give him that end game win.
It's going to be an interesting sort of +3 turns as well, because that Tapu Fini does have access to Heal Pulse, and if Kazuki is able to knock out one of Gavin's Pokemon and bring it down so that they each have 2 Pokemon left on the field, that gives Gavin an opportunity to sort of swing his win condition a little bit by going for something like a Heal Pulse. If he's worried that his opponent is going to protect and maybe try and maintain their health advantage, he can simply heal one of his own Pokemon.
The turn has started and the time is still ticking. Lunala protecting itself from the potential onslaught of this Yveltal. That onslaught comes in the form of Sucker Punch, and it's not going to be enough. Tapu Koko, though, will Volt Switch into this Tapu Fini. It's not enough for the knockout right now, and it's enough to activate that Citrus Berry as well. That Citrus Berry really coming up, bringing that Tapu Fini in a very hard-to-beat position, and the Tapu Fini just keeps on Icy Winding. This is going to be our turn 0, the equivalent of the turn that was active when the time was called. This is a mechanic that's more popular in a trading card game, but the way these games have been going today, we've got to start considering it. The move selection screen is up, and I believe, unless I hear anything else, that we're in the +3 turns now.
Yeah, and this is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, because Gavin's Pokemon are, for the most part below that half-health mark, whereas Kazuki's Pokemon are still sitting, nearly at full health. I think Gavin's done a really great job of setting himself up for success during this endgame with the prevalence of the Icy Winds from that Tapu Fini. I think being faster than his opponent is going to be really important in these turns, but if Kazuki's able to find a way to knock out one of these Pokemon, honestly, I would focus in on that Tapu Fini and somehow, deal with this Groudon moving forwards. It is at full health. That's going to be very hard to power through. I think that, he certainly does have it now, but it's going to be tough to find.
Well, the Groudon is coming back in. That's going to be one of those big hitters that he needs. The Pokemon count, though, immediately leveled up by this Tapu Koko Volt Switch, heading towards that Tapu Fini. And it's right back down to the end of this game. Lunala and Groudon facing off against Yveltal and Tapu Koko immediately. The health count is, I guess, it's a lot bigger than just the Pokemon we see on screen. And there's so many options for both these players. This is going to be turn number 2, and it's going to get real tight, depending on how the Pokemon count goes. Of course, if the Lunala falls, then it gets a little bit tricky. If the Lunala stays up and we're at 2-2, then we're looking at health.
And it's going to be interesting to see if Gavin does go for the protect on the Lunala this turn. You know, it's certainly going to be a little bit of calculations that need to be done, as it looks like the Lunala will remain on the field. But it's going to come down to the percent of total health throughout the party of these Pokemon remaining, as Kazuki's Tapu Koko also goes for a protect. So this Precipice Blades will not do any damage this turn, but this Yveltal is free to go for a foul play into that Groudon. So, you know, slowly lowering its health and effectively lowering the amount of health percentage still remaining on Gavin's side of the field, as this is the final turn of play that we're entering in this game.
Yeah, this is going to be the final turn of gameplay before we do have to do some of those calculations to see exactly where the winner is going to be. This is the final turn. You know, the time has been run down for a little bit, and we'll see if there's a clear winner. Obviously, if there's a Pokemon advantage in here, then it's going to be really easy to decide. Lunala tries to protect again.
Double protect.
And gets it.
No.
Kazuki may have committed to that knockout. Tapu Koko itself protects.
Oh, no.
Doesn't get it. Groudon's Precipice Blades will land on the Tapu Koko. So both players fishing for that option. And unless this Yveltal can pull something spectacular out, I don't think he's targeted that Groudon. The Yveltal foul play lands into the protect. And that does mean that in turn 3 of time, no need for the calculator here. It's going to be a clear Pokemon advantage, 2-1 on the end of this day. And Gavin Michaels looks to wrap this one up.
I like how they both went for the double protect that last turn. That really was their out. You know, if you get the double protect, obviously your Pokemon will remain on the field. It's not likely to happen, but, you know, Kazuki was in a situation where that Tapu Koko really wasn't going to threaten any knockouts on these Pokemon, and I feel like that Lunala was in a similar spot. It may have been able to go for some big damage down onto that Tapu Koko, but overall, you know, just afraid of what would happen from that Yveltal as a result, since Groudon could not attack it with, you know, the Precipice Blade to knock it out. So it looks like there's at least one more turn of play, as the Lunala will be going for the Z move, but, you know, Kazuki just looks really defeated.
Yeah.
You have to imagine it's going to be a Fire Punch, then a Z move into that Yveltal.
Apologies for the confusion, and we do appear to have a little bit more gameplay going on. The Lunala over on Gavin's side of the field does finally use his Z move, menacing Moonray's Maelstrom here. Even if this is the last turn, I think it's going to result pretty clearly one way. Menacing Moonray's Maelstrom. We do get a clear and concise result, I guess.
And we get to see,
nice.
You know, one of the nicest Z move animations in the game. I think it's a personal favorite after the Ultra format, all being said and done.
Yeah, well, the Yveltal not able to take too much of that, and Groudon free to just Fire Punch, completely wrapping up the game. For those of you with any doubt on the winner, you got a bonus turn there, and Gavin wraps this one up comfortably.
Yeah, just, again, really well played. Even though we were incorrect about how many turns were left at the end, I really liked how Gavin just managed his board position. You know, using those ice